just to recap, again, we talked a little bit already about the influences of the English system on American government, including the idea that we, even in a unitary system, which is what Britain had, right, one central source of, what do we call it, that fancy word for power? Sovereignty, very good. But even in the unitary system that is Great Britain, they had established several levels of government for efficiency, right? You don't want to always go to one central person every single time you have a problem. So we're going to develop that. We're of course going to believe in, what's that one word that we use to replace limited government? Constitutionalism, right? We're going to believe in the idea that there should be some set of rules or limitations on the power of the government, that even the government itself is not above the law. The idea of republicanism, that we should choose representatives who should then represent us, is going to rub off on American politics. Interestingly, this is kind of one of the reasons we get to the American Revolution, right? That the British political system was based on the idea that, like, your little location, your, I don't really know what they're called, your county or whatever it is, would elect an MP, right, a member of Parliament, and this is used to be only for the House of Commons. Now it's for everybody, but anyway. And the House of Commons used to have no power, but in any case, when they debated, it was understood that each MP was representing their constituents, right? It wasn't like we select some members of Parliament and then they just kind of generally represent everybody or like try to think about everybody. The British set it up so that each individual location, the rural locations, the more industrializing locations, the locations that base their livelihoods off of trade, and so on and so forth, that each of those opinions would be heard distinctly. So, for example, when the British tell us that, don't worry about representation, you know, like you're virtually represented in our government because Parliament represents the English citizens and you're an English citizen, so yay, you know, that didn't work for the Americans because they understood, they had grown up under the political culture and the political assumption that you had to have a representative from where you were in order to really get your views reflected, and that's going to come through in American government. And then, of course, these are just some documents that are really impactful on American government. And this really all relates to the notion of constitutionalism. The Magna Carta, the Petition of Right, the English Bill of Rights, each of these were documents that the English nobles basically forced upon their kings to ensure that the king would not have that kind of absolute power. But over time, these political, goals or political ideals are going to become more and more out of touch with the reality of life as English colonists in the American colonies. And so we've talked about the idea of virtual representation, right? That's when the king said, you know, you guys are arguing no taxation without representation, but you're already represented because Parliament represents all English citizens. And that wasn't going to work. And then as, you know, the breakdown, and you guys have had American history, so as we get through all of those conflicts, the Quartering Act and the Stamp Act and the, you know, coercive acts, as we begin to see all of these problems kind of pile up, the American colonists are going to really fall back on the idea that they have some fundamental rights that are being violated. And here the Americans, who are ever pragmatic, are going to look at Locke and Rousseau and Montesquieu, Locke sort of foremost among all of them, and say, you know, this isn't what government is supposed to be doing. And this is going to really lead us down the road towards revolution. So then, of course, in 1776, Thomas Paine is going to publish Common Sense. In history classes, we've talked about, the historical ramifications, like how it's going to push them towards independence, and that's relevant here too. But in a bigger way, it's important to remember that Common Sense is going to outline sort of like allegiance to these political principles. The argument in Common Sense sort of goes that, like, here's what England has set up for us. Here's this inheritance. You might remember if you were in APUSH that we talked about how Paine uses this analogy that, like, the colonies used to be children who needed guidance, and now they're, like, mature and they don't need to be controlled anymore. Well, along that same sort of analogy, Paine describes how the political independence of the colonies has developed over time. That at first they were so sparse and they didn't have the government, but that Mother England has passed down these political values, these important ideas, and so that therefore we ought to translate them into a real government. Now is the time. We shouldn't be told to abandon these values, or that these values only count if you're in England. And so of course we're going to declare independence. This doesn't actually happen on July 4th, 1776 exactly. July 2nd, 1776 is when the Continental Congress votes yeah, we should declare independence. Hey, you, TJ, like, go figure it out. And so he goes and writes furiously for the next 36 or so hours. And then the only thing that happens on July the 4th is that they accept the final document. And they vote, okay, this is the one, we want to have this one typed up, not typed up, or whatever, written up carefully, and formalized. And then they came back about a month later, early in August, of 1776, and it's actually in August that they physically sign this document, right? So they have to approve the final version, and then it gets formalized, into that fancy parchment that we can go see National Archives or whatever, and then it will actually be signed. But in any case, look, there's Thomas Jefferson. Part of that thing that they did on July the 4th was to edit out some parts of the process, and as the stories go, apparently Thomas Jefferson is a little bit like AP students, in that he really didn't like his work being critiqued. And so he apparently sat very uncomfortably, as they debate and they want to scratch out this word here and this phrase a little too whatever, his course thought it was perfect. But perhaps one of the most interesting deletions is an entire paragraph that gets struck. And I'll let you kind of glance at it here. This is one of the grievances. So you'll notice the Declaration of Independence, it has a bit of a introductory text, and then it's primarily a whole bunch of list of grievances. Give me another word for grievances. Complaints. This is one of the complaints Thomas Jefferson wanted to levy against the king, and it was slavery. He wanted to argue that one of the reasons that the King of England was a bad king was because he had allowed slavery to be continued and had tried to prevent the end of slavery. But South Carolina and Georgia are absolutely not going to sign on to a document that says that it's a bad thing for slavery to exist. So this piece is deleted. It's kind of ironic because Jefferson unslaves himself. But anyway, that one's dismissed. So what we're going to do now is you are going to be reading over the Declaration of Independence, and you're going to answer some questions. There are 5 big questions here. Some of them are interpretive. So he starts, you guys all know the beginning, right? Are endowed with their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You got that. So, but what does that mean? And you might look through for some contextual evidence, like when you read through the grievances, what are the places where Jefferson argued that our lives were being threatened? What are the places where he was arguing that our liberty was being threatened? What did he mean when he said pursuit of happiness? Because that matters, right? The Declaration of Independence is kind of like, I don't know, like a religious text, like required reading. This is the foundational document for American government, and so it embodies a lot of these values. So what do we mean when we say that we all have the right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness? Then of course you're going to look for the social contract. It says, quote, the line. There's really 2 lines, so you might look for them both. You're going to list 10 abuses in your own words. I'm not asking you to copy from the Declaration. I can read what it says, but I want to make sure that you can identify 10 specific problems that the Americans had with British government. Then at the very end, it talks about the rights of independent states. So this gets into a little bit of state theory, right? Like what do governments have to be able to do? So how did they understand that back in 1776? And then you're going to read the last sentence. I'll more pre-warn you or whatever. It's a little bit dramatic. But see if you can put that one into your own words. So I'm going to give you about 10-ish minutes. See what you can do.